It's a land of rugged shorelines, sculptures carved by nature's hand, and rushing rivers that wind through colorful forests. A land whose power inspired one of America's greatest architects and produces harvests of plenty that feed millions. Wisconsin. It was once America's wild frontier and can still feel that way today. From its fortunes in timber and fur to its fertile soil, Wisconsin's natural riches helped build the nation. Waves of European settlers colored Wisconsin life with their distinctive cultures and made Milwaukee famous for its wildly successful beer industry. Here, two friends tinkering with engines in a backyard shed created one of America's most iconic machines. It's a state full of surprising twists and turns. In Wisconsin, archaeologists have discovered intriguing evidence of an ancient people and their mysterious rituals. And a now peaceful river was once the site of a brutal massacre by the U.S. Army. And a remote working-class town is home to one of the biggest success stories in professional sports. Welcome to the very colorful world of Wisconsin. There's nothing like a sunrise in Wisconsin. When the morning light bathes forests, fields, and farms. When flocks of birds salute the dawn. And wind turbines reap the morning breezes. It's a state that gleams like a treasure chest heaped with gold. It was the promise of treasure that first lured Europeans to the land that's now Wisconsin nearly 400 years ago. In 1634, a French explorer named Jean Nicolet paddled into this body of water, now known as Green Bay. He was searching for a route to China, where he believed he could find great riches. When he stepped ashore on this wild coastline, Nicolet was dressed in Chinese silk robes and fired his pistols into the air, hoping to impress anyone who might be watching. In fact, some were. A few of Wisconsin's native Ho-Chunk Indians appeared out of the trees and invited Nicolet to a banquet of beaver. He quickly realized that the area was rich in fur and claimed the land that's now Wisconsin for the King of France. He also named the body of water he arrived on Green Bay for its distinctive color. These days, there's no doubt about whether Wisconsin belongs to France, especially among those who live here in the city of Green Bay, which lies at the mouth of the Fox River, just a few miles from where Jean Nicolet first landed on Wisconsin shores. But the true heart of this city isn't its downtown. It's Lambeau Field, the home of the Green Bay Packers football team. This 70,000-seat stadium is a holy shrine for Packers fans. It was named after Earl Curly Lambeau, who started Wisconsin's legendary team back in 1919. Green Bay is the smallest city in the country with a major professional sports team. But the Packers have no problem filling seats. Since 1960, every game played at Lambeau Field has been sold out. The current wait for season tickets is 30 years. There's a good reason the field is empty today. It's still preseason. But just across the street, the Packers are hard at work at the team's training facility, the Don Hutson Center. The Packers have won 13 NFL titles, more than any other team, and 4 Super Bowl trophies. Their former coach, Vince Lombardi, was so legendary in the 1960s, he became a model for all NFL coaches who followed. After his death from cancer in 1970, winners of every Super Bowl have been handed the Vince Lombardi Trophy. Now, with Super Bowl MVP quarterback Aaron Rodgers, number 12, the Packers are poised for long-term success. It's the only sports team in the nation that's actually owned by its fans. There are currently more than 350,000 shareholders, although none of them receives a dividend, and the share price always remains the same. The strong community spirit that binds Green Bay Packers fans together today got its start just a few miles up the Fox River. During its early days as a trading post, Green Bay was on its own in the Wisconsin wilderness. Early settlers survived by building simple homes, like this one-room fur trader's cabin that dates from 1800. To help cope with the tough conditions, residents banded together and supported one another. Here at Green Bay's Heritage Hill State Park, a living history museum offers a glimpse of what that early community looked like. There was a simple church, a cheese factory, and officers' quarters. As their buildings grew in size, so too did the tight bonds of Green Bay's self-reliant community. Bonds that helped the pioneers work together to turn Wisconsin's forests into fields of plenty. Fields that are still being worked today are nearly 77,000 farms all across the state. 99% of Wisconsin's farms are family-owned, including these colorful fields in the town of Cranmore, where one crop stands out like no other: cranberries. There are more cranberries grown in Wisconsin than any other state, which is why it's the state's official fruit. This tiny tart fruit thrives in the sandy, marshy flatlands of central Wisconsin. For most of the year, cranberry fields look like those of any other crop. But when harvest time arrives in late September, growers flood their fields with 6 to 10 inches of water to make it easier to harvest the fruit. These cranberry cowboys, wearing waders instead of chaps, move the giant hoses from field to field. Once they're flooded, a special harvester removes the fruit from the vine. As it's towed through the water, rods on the back of the harvester whack and shake the plants, knocking the berries loose. A Wisconsin farmer invented this machine and named it the Ruby Slipper for the fast but gentle way it slips the red fruit from the vine. Inside every cranberry is a tiny pocket of air that makes the berries float in the water, which is why entire fields quickly turn blood red. Next, a tractor blows the berries away from the edge and pulls a long rubber boom into place behind them. Then the booms are reeled in, lassoing the fruit. They're pulled into a circle, and the result is a fruit-filled corral that looks like one big juicy cranberry from the air. To harvest the fruit, farmers tighten the boom and then push the berries towards a conveyor belt. This self-feeding device draws the berries to its mouth and sucks them up to a separator unit where leaves and stems are removed. These fresh cranberries will be cleaned and graded and then sent on to a processing plant where they'll be squeezed into juice or turned into sauces. Wisconsin's 2013 cranberry harvest was one for the history books. Growers shipped 5 million barrels, the largest crop on record, worth $300 million. But the mighty cranberry isn't the only farm product on Wisconsin's bountiful plate. From above, the vast array of this state's crops emblazon the landscape with mesmerizing patterns and shapes, like some giant's crazy quilt, woven of edible yarns and threads. But as America's dairy land, Wisconsin is best known not for its stripes of green and gold, but for its spots of black and white. Cows. This herd of Holsteins belongs to one of more than 11,000 dairy farms that blanket the state. Together, they produce almost 60 million gallons of milk a week, enough to fill up 12 Olympic-sized swimming pools every day. Most of that milk is shipped off to cheesemakers, including this one, the Silver Lewis Cheese Factory Co-op in Monticello, which is more than 100 years old. It's known for its Munster and brick cheeses, just 2 of the more than 600 kinds of cheese made in Wisconsin. But long before cows here were king and cranberries filled its fields, the land that's now Wisconsin was home to an ancient people who left behind tantalizing evidence of mysterious and possibly even cannibalistic rituals. It's harvest time in Wisconsin. But just because the sun is setting here in Winnebago County doesn't mean the workday is done. Putting food on the nation's table is much more than a 9-to-5 job in this northern state. Wisconsin farmers work night and day to harvest the riches of their fertile soil. This harvester is gathering corn roughage, which includes the corn itself, as well as the cob and the husks of the plants. It will be used as nutrient-rich feed for Wisconsin's dairy cows. A single harvester like this one can fill up an entire trailer in just a few minutes. These days, harvesters are armed with GPS technology to help ensure the best and most efficient yields. Whenever the crops are ripe for picking, they light up Wisconsin's fields well into the night. But there was a time when the only night lights were the glows of fires of an ancient people. Their story is cloaked in mystery, but luckily, they left some fascinating evidence of their existence behind. Here, on the banks of the Crawfish River in south-central Wisconsin, a strange apparition rises out of the earth. A massive ancient mound, shaped like a flat-topped pyramid. A European settler stumbled upon this place back in 1835. It was given the name Aztlan by those who believed that it could only have been built by the Aztecs of far-off Mexico. But archaeologists digging here have since uncovered the real story. 1,000 years ago, a large, bustling town of 500 people sprawled across this broad plain. It was built not by the Aztecs, but by prehistoric Native Americans who were part of the Mississippian culture, which dates back more than 1,000 years. They inhabited a vast stretch of land, all the way from Wisconsin to the Gulf of Mexico. On this mound, a set of wide stairs climb from a central plaza up 2 levels of platforms to where a chief's house or a temple once stood, in which a sacred flame was kept burning. The fortress walls likely mean the townspeople were actively at war. But the question is, with whom? Excavations within these walls have yielded some grisly finds, including burnt human bones in fire pits, which may be evidence of human sacrifice. They also uncovered the remains of a young girl found buried with hundreds of clamshells from the far-off ocean. The people of Aztlan abandoned the site around 1300 and simply vanished. No one knows where they went or why. In their wake, other Native American tribes arrived in Wisconsin. And by By the time the first European fur traders landed on the shores of Lake Superior, more than 20,000 Native Americans called Wisconsin home. One of the most powerful Indian tribes was the Ojibwe. They plied Wisconsin's waters in sleek, fast birch bark canoes, along the same shores that tour boats like the Superior Princess do today. The Ojibwe thrived here, in this magical world of water, sea caves, and weathered sandstone bluffs. This is the landscape of the Apostle Islands, a Wisconsin treasure. They lie off the northernmost tip of the state in Lake Superior, a chain of 22 islands of all shapes and sizes. Today, 21 of them are part of the Apostle Islands National Lakeshore. This ferry is running between the mainland and Madeline Island, the largest and most developed of the Apostle Islands. It's a lifeline for residents living in the historic town of La Pointe. In 1659, French explorers landed here and established a fur trading post and a Catholic mission for the native people. Today, La Pointe is a popular summer getaway spot, and the population jumps from 200 to 2,500 or more once warm weather arrives. Soon after La Pointe was founded, the demand for beaver fur in Europe skyrocketed. Wisconsin had plenty of beaver and Indians willing to hunt them. But getting all that fur out to market was a much bigger challenge. That's why French traders chose a spot on the Mississippi River on what's now Wisconsin's western border for a massive new trading post. They named it Prairie du Chien, after a Fox Indian chief called Prairie Dog. Hunters delivered furs to the post, then the pelts were loaded into large freight canoes and paddled out to market. The bustling river port was laid out along a grid of streets that's still visible today and was the center of Wisconsin's booming fur trade for 150 years. In 1965, a flood swept through the old town, destroying most of the buildings, but not this one, Villa Louis. Built in 1871, this mansion was named after its builder, Louis Dousman, who financed it with a fur trading fortune earned by his father, Wisconsin's first millionaire, a man named Hercules Dousman. Today, Villa Louis is a popular spot to celebrate weddings and other special events. Part of this old boomtown's allure is that here, the Mississippi River can seem just as wild and peaceful as it was centuries ago. But it hasn't always been this way. Just 37 miles upstream lies the site of one of the most brutal events in America's westward expansion. It's known as the Bad Axe Massacre. In the early 1800s, as settlers started pushing into the land that's now Wisconsin and Illinois, the U.S. put more and more pressure on the region's native tribes to leave. Many were forced to give up their ancestral lands and were exiled across the Mississippi River to less desirable territory out west. But in the spring of 1832, about 1,000 Sauk and Fox Indians crossed back over the Mississippi River from the west. Their chief, Black Hawk, believed the treaty that forced them into exile was invalid. He and a large group of men, women, and children decided to travel through Wisconsin to peacefully reoccupy their homeland in what's now Illinois. But when white settlers saw Native Americans returning to reclaim their land, they panicked, fearing a hostile invasion. State militia and U.S. Army troops were quickly dispatched to pursue and attack Black Hawk and teach the Native Americans a lesson. On August 1st, the chief and his group reached the banks of the Mississippi River here, close to the mouth of the Bad Axe River. They set camp, planning to cross to safety the next day. But when they awoke, they found themselves in a deadly vice grip. From the east, 1,000 U.S. troops were storming down on them from these bluffs. The Indians camped below fled towards the Mississippi River, with the soldiers hot on their heels. In the water, many in Black Hawk's group quickly drowned. Those who could swim made for the river's western bank, but an Army gunboat named the Warrior was just offshore. Soldiers on board opened fire indiscriminately on the men, women, and children in the water. Some survivors tried to hide in groves of willow trees on the small islands that still dot this stretch of the Mississippi today. But the U.S. soldiers turned on them too and flushed them out with a bayonet charge. After the terrifying slaughter, 250 Native Americans were dead. Bodies floated in the water, and the Mississippi River ran red with blood. Black Hawk managed to make it out alive, but with his band decimated, the chief had no choice but to surrender. In the decades following the Bad Axe Massacre, waves of European immigrants came to settle the land that's now Wisconsin. They would soon transform the Wisconsin Territory into a state, and a small village between two lakes into its new glimmering capital. Soar across the land of Wisconsin, and it's possible to imagine that you've been transported to Europe, especially here in the picturesque village of New Glarus, which looks like a little slice of the Alps set down in the hills of southern Wisconsin. The town was founded in 1845 by immigrants from Glarus, Switzerland. Suffering from poverty at home, they came to America hoping to start new, more prosperous lives. Today, the town's residents are proud of their Swiss heritage and traditions. Nearby, at the New Glarus Brewery, members of a yodelers club come to bathe the valley with the sounds of traditional Swiss Alp horns. These long horns were once used in Switzerland by farmers to communicate with each other across remote valleys. Today, these Alp horns are blown just for fun and to embrace the history of one European community that settled this state almost 2 centuries ago. By 1835, the flood of immigrants into places like New Glarus had pushed Wisconsin's population over the 10,000 mark, making it eligible to be declared a U.S. territory by Congress. A sliver of land between Lakes Mendota and Monona was chosen as the site of the new territory's capital. It was named Madison, in honor of the recently deceased President James Madison. 10 years later, in 1848, Wisconsin became America's 30th state, and Madison its new state capital. By 1915, the dome of the new Wisconsin State House stood 284 feet over town, just 3 feet less than the nation's capital in Washington, D.C. It was in these halls of government that a unique brand of public policy was launched in the early 1900s. The leader of the progressive movement, as it was called, was a fiery politician named Fighting Bob LaFollette. A Wisconsin governor, U.S. senator, and presidential candidate, LaFollette championed the rights of average citizens while cutting the influence of big business and money on politics. The results were some of the first state laws on workers' compensation, child labor, and factory safety regulation. But in recent years, lawmakers have reversed Wisconsin's liberal legacy. In 2011, the state faced a significant budget shortfall. To close the deficit, Republican Governor Scott Walker pushed a bill that would take away public employees' rights to bargain collectively and limit pay raises, in addition to other union-busting measures. Democratic lawmakers tried to stall the vote, and nearly 100,000 demonstrators occupied the Capitol grounds. A local pizza shop delivered thousands of pies to the demonstrators, all paid for by their supporters around the world. But in the end, Walker's bill succeeded, nudging the state to the political right. But political dissent is nothing new for Madison. Here at the University of Wisconsin, the beautiful lakeside campus is quiet today. But back in the late 1960s, at the height of the Vietnam War, it was a hotbed of anti-war fervor and student protests, including one that ended with a deadly act of terrorism. In 1970, 4 young anti-war activists met here at Madison's Nitty Gritty Bar. Over drinks, they plotted to bomb the Army Mathematics Research Center, which was housed nearby in the university's Sterling Hall. In the early morning hours of August 24th, the bombers, who were all between 18 and 22 years old, parked a van filled with fertilizer, fuel, and dynamite outside Sterling Hall. The massive blast that followed ripped through the building, sent a ball of fire into the sky, and killed a young researcher inside. When investigators arrived, a fragment of the engine was all that remained of the van that held the bomb. An FBI manhunt caught 3 of the bombers, but the 4th, Leo Burt, is still at large. He's managed to elude federal authorities for more than 45 years. The Sterling Hall bombing remained the worst act of domestic terrorism in America until the Oklahoma City bombing 25 years later. Political engagement still runs deep on campus, but it's not the only thing consuming students' time. Many of them are busy milking cows and making cheese. Here at the University Dairy Barn, part of the high-tech Center for Dairy Research in Babcock Hall. On fall Saturdays, it's a safe bet you can find a high percentage of the student body here in the bleachers of Camp Randall Stadium, home field of the Badgers football team. These massive stands can seat 80,321 fervent fans, making Camp Randall the 5th largest stadium in college football. But not all famous schools in Wisconsin take up an entire town. 2 of the most famous are just one-room schoolhouses. One of them lies in Watertown, 40 miles east of Madison. In 1856, a German immigrant and mom named Margarita Schurz started a home school for her daughter and nieces. When other kids in town joined it too, Schurz opened a preschool in this simple white schoolhouse. She called it a kindergarten, a German word for children's garden. Today, thanks to Schurz, kindergarten is a household name across the country. Her school is almost identical to another famous little Wisconsin schoolhouse. This one, in the town of Ripon, is where the Republican Party got its start back in 1854. At the time, liberal-minded citizens of Ripon were outraged to learn that a new bill in the U.S. Congress could extend slavery into the western territories of Kansas and Nebraska. So one night, dozens of residents crowded into Ripon's one-room schoolhouse and voted overwhelmingly to form a new anti-slavery party. They decided to name it the Republican Party. The political arena is not the only place where radical ideas have been successfully hatched in Wisconsin. Just over a century ago, 2 boyhood pals from Milwaukee got together to build a motorized bicycle and ended up creating one of America's most iconic brands. When October arrives in central Wisconsin, crisp air, fall colors, and the open road beckon to all. But for some, there's only one way to take it in. On the state's homegrown hog, a Harley. With the wind whipping past and a few friends along for the ride, for these Harley-Davidson lovers and many others like them around the world, their bikes are a way of life. One that got its start right here on Wisconsin's back roads more than a century ago. It all started back in 1903. Two Wisconsin friends, William Harley and Arthur Davidson, both 22 years old at the time, decided to build a motorized bicycle in the Davidson family's backyard. Their first bike was a racer and immediately started to sell. They painted the name the Harley-Davidson Motor Company on the door of their one-room workshop. Today, the headquarters for Harley-Davidson still stands where the company's first factory was built in 1906. A year the fledgling manufacturer made 50 motorbikes. The powerful, elegantly simple bikes quickly caught on, and by 1920, Harley-Davidson was the largest motorcycle producer in the world, turning out 28,000 bikes that year alone. Today, Harley-Davidsons are made in factories scattered across the Midwest, but Milwaukee remains home base for this iconic brand. Milwaukee Harbor lies at the confluence of three rivers, the Milwaukee, the Menominee, and the Kinnickinnick, that all empty into Lake Michigan, one of America's greatest inland ports. In the early 1800s, settlers saw the great potential of this port for trade. They knew that whoever controlled access to the rivers would be rich. By the 1830s, the present-day city was home to three rival settlements. In the north, Juneautown, started by Solomon Juneau. In the west, Kilbourne Town, founded by Byron Kilbourne. And in the south, Walker's Point, started by George Walker. Each man wanted his own settlement to be the hub for the lucrative and increasingly busy trade at Milwaukee's port. The competition between the three communities grew so intense that open fighting broke out in 1845 in what's now famously known as Milwaukee's Bridge War. The first flashpoint was here, where the Juneau Avenue Bridge now stands. In 1840, the territorial legislature ordered a bridge to be built here, linking Juneautown and Kilbourne Town. The two communities bickered over construction costs until in 1845, angry residents of Kilbourne Town tore down part of the new bridge in protest. In return, residents in Juneautown aimed a cannon across the river at Byron Kilbourne's own house and threatened to shell it. In the following weeks, two more bridges over the Milwaukee River were destroyed by mobs. But luckily, cooler heads finally prevailed. In 1846, residents of the three separate towns voted to put aside their differences and build one great city called Milwaukee, named for an Algonquin Indian word that means gathering place by the water. It's still possible to see evidence of the rivalry between Milwaukee's original founders from the air. Back in the early 1800s, each of those settlements designed their own individual street plans, which is why today, when the city's streets reach the bridges, they often have to make a slight bend to meet up with a corresponding street on the other side. During Milwaukee's first 50 years, German immigrants flooded into the city, and by 1880, 27% of its population was German-born, the highest concentration of any one immigrant group in an American city. And Germans felt right at home. There were German newspapers, music societies, restaurants, and beer gardens, serving locally brewed German beer. In its heyday in the late 1800s, Milwaukee was America's beer capital, home to many of the nation's biggest breweries. One of the first was Pabst, started in 1844. After winning numerous awards, the brewery began tying blue ribbons around the necks of its bottles, which inspired its most famous brand, Pabst Blue Ribbon. During Prohibition, Pabst turned to making cheese, but went back to beer when Prohibition ended. In 1977, the brewery produced 18 million barrels. Pabst is no longer brewed here in Milwaukee, but one of Milwaukee's oldest beer makers is still going strong. Miller Brewing got its start here more than 160 years ago. The story goes that Frederick Miller, the company's founder, arrived in Milwaukee from Germany with special brewer's yeast stuffed into his pockets. In 1855, Miller bought the Plank Road Brewery, and turned it into Miller Brewing. The company's original building still stands, but is now dwarfed by the modern plant that surrounds it. Nearby, in Miller's distribution center, more than 3 billion bottles of beer are loaded up and shipped out each year across the country. But some of it stays right here in town, for fans, at nearby Miller Park. It's the home of the Milwaukee Brewers Baseball Club. The 42,000-seat stadium can keep teams playing no matter what the weather, thanks to a high-tech fan-shaped steel roof. It's made up of 5 movable panels. They slide open and closed on a rail system that's mounted atop the stadium's walls. When the rain comes, it takes just 10 minutes for the roof to close. Nearby, there's another modern landmark that adapts to the weather. On the shore of Lake Michigan stands the Milwaukee Art Museum. Its dramatic Quadracci Pavilion, built in 2001, was designed by Santiago Calatrava, a Spanish architect and engineer known for his bridges and train stations in Europe. Since the site lies next to Lake Michigan and Milwaukee's bustling port, Calatrava decided to design the museum's entrance to look like the prow of a ship. And soaring above are 72 movable steel fins that act as a giant sunscreen for the museum. Sensors on the fins monitor wind speed, and when the wind blows too strongly, the fins automatically fold up for safety. Come autumn, Wisconsin's great North Woods are transformed into a scenic wonderland that's best appreciated either from high above or from right down below. Every year, tourists spend more than $1 billion here for a chance to set eyes on this brilliant, short-lived display of red, yellow, and orange. But there was a time when there was nothing here but clear-cut, for as far as the eye could see. It all started in the 1830s, when timber companies began cutting down Wisconsin's towering forests of white pine. As cities and towns rose across the Midwest, Wisconsin's forests fell to the axe. By 1900, nearly 20 million acres of forest land had been stripped clean. The ancient trees were gone forever, but new growth started to replace them. Today's fall colors come from a wide range of tree species that now stand where ancient forests of white pine once did. Wisconsin's forests are now managed for their long-term health and productivity instead of for quick profits. One of those stewards is the Menominee Indian tribe, which looks after nearly 250,000 acres of Wisconsin forest. Their guiding principle is that the tribe's future depends on these trees. It's why the Menominee harvest timber at a sustainable rate, so they can leave plenty for the future. Cut timber is trucked to the tribal sawmill, which provides good-paying jobs, employing nearly half of those who work on the Menominee Indian tribe's reservation. The Menominee have been such good stewards of the land that today, there is more timber standing in the tribe's forest than when they started logging back in 1854. For the Menominee, the region's forests have always been at the heart of who they are as a people. And that's the case today for many Wisconsinites. Their state's lush natural beauty has always exerted a strong pull. Many find comfort and solace in its wild places. Others find inspiration. Like one of the world's most visionary architects, who was inspired by Wisconsin's natural beauty to build one of the most famous and admired houses in America. It's known as Taliesin, a Welsh word that means shining brow, for its position on the edge of a hill overlooking the valley. This was the home and workshop of Frank Lloyd Wright for 48 years, until his death in 1959. Wright, a Wisconsin native, built Taliesin in 1911 as a country home for him and his mistress, Martha Borthwick. He also wanted it to be a laboratory for his ideas, many of which were inspired by the landscape surrounding the house. Taliesin is filled with beautiful design touches and bold experiments, like this cantilevered walkway that appears to float on thin air. But what Wright had imagined as a peaceful haven suddenly turned into a house of horrors on August 15, 1914. Wright was out of town when his butler, Julian Carleton, who knew he was soon to be laid off, decided to take revenge. As a group of employees gathered in the dining room for lunch, Carleton locked the dining room doors, doused that wing of the house with gasoline, and set it ablaze. He then walked to an adjoining porch where Martha and her 2 young children were sitting, and killed all 3 of them with an axe. As the fire grew, 6 of the employees escaped by climbing out the dining room windows, only to find the killer waiting for them in the yard. 4 were cut down. The other 2 managed to escape. When Frank Lloyd Wright returned to Taliesin, he was devastated. But he vowed to rebuild the house in the memory of his murdered love. But in 1925, the second Taliesin also burned to the ground, and Wright vowed once again to rebuild it on top of the ashes. Today, his third and final Taliesin is now a museum and education center. Frank Lloyd Wright sought peace and inspiration in central Wisconsin, just as thousands of others do each year at a place called the Dells. It's a 15-mile stretch of the Wisconsin River that's home to a famous series of 150-foot-high bluffs carved by wind, water, and weather. This scenic gorge was formed during the last ice age, roughly 10,000 years ago, when a giant dam of ice burst, unleashing a flood that raced through and scoured the walls of this valley. Wisconsin is a state defined by water. From the Mississippi River that flows along its western border, to Lake Superior and its Apostle Islands, to the thousands of lakes and streams that cover this state. But there's nothing in Wisconsin quite like this. A finger of land surrounded by water that remains one of the most remote and beautiful places in the nation. It's called the Door Peninsula and stretches out 82 miles northeast from Green Bay, like the jagged blade of a knife, reaching right up to the Michigan border. Once, ships carrying Wisconsin timber had to travel all the way around the peninsula to bring that timber to ports like Chicago and Detroit. It was such a dangerous passage, it was known as Death's Door, which was how the Door Peninsula got its name. Over the centuries, hundreds of vessels shipwrecked in these shoal-filled waters. But in the 1870s, businessmen dug a giant canal across the Door Peninsula to shorten the route to Green Bay from Lake Michigan. Today, it's managed by the Army Corps of Engineers and is home to one of the last great industries still in operation on the Great Lakes, the Bay Shipbuilding Company in the town of Sturgeon Bay. Here, highly skilled crews are kept busy repairing and building vessels of all sizes. When their shifts end, the workers head home to life in one of the most idyllic spots in the U.S. Etched by a rocky and weather-beaten coastline on 3 sides, the Door Peninsula seems magically removed from the rest of the world. Thinning to less than 2 miles at its northern tip, it's full of old farms, wineries, and golden fields of wheat. But the threats to ships on Lake Michigan are still very real, which is why the peninsula is home to a magnificent collection of historic lighthouses, 11 in all. They're strung like bright pearls around its neck. One of the most dramatic is this one. The Cana Island Lighthouse soars over the eastern side of the peninsula and is one of the most recognized landmarks in all of Wisconsin. First lit in 1870, Cana Island Light still serves as a navigational aid, though its antique glass lens is now automated and computer-controlled. Today, the lighthouse also serves a new purpose. Open to the public, its beauty attracts visitors like moths to a flame. They climb its steep steps for a chance to look out over the third largest of America's Great Lakes. And in that way, it's the perfect symbol for Wisconsin, a land where the best of old and new, of city and wilderness freely mix, to come out shining brighter than before.